around the world, a celebration of the Millennium. This is ABC 2000. With Peter Jennings at ABC 2000 headquarters in Times Square and our correspondents spanning the globe in Shanghai, Bombay, Bethlehem, Moscow, Havana, Rio de Janeiro, and across the U.S., reports from Miami, New Orleans, Tucson, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and in New York, Dick Clark counting down to the new year in Times Square. Special Millennium performances by Elton John, Billy Joel, David Blaine, and Barbra Streisand. Now from ABC 2000 headquarters at Times Square in New York, Peter Jennings.
Times Square in New York, which we have said before today, is at least regarded by New Yorkers as the center of the universe. And it has been and continues to be a great scene as maybe we could go, in fact, to their cameras just for half a second now to give you some indication. They have nothing at the moment, okay, but they've done a wonderful job all day trying to connect the people here and people who've seen them through us with a lot of the other countries in the world. Now take a look at this picture. Not the most dramatic picture you've ever seen, but this is Cheyenne Mountain. This is the North American Air Defense Command Center at Cheyenne Mountain near Colorado Springs. And what they are doing at this particular moment is briefing on how things have gone between the United States and Russia. There was some concern, obviously, about the Russian nuclear assets as the century changed, and it all seems to have gone pretty darn well. But let's listen for just a second.
Or anomalies reported to us at this time. All systems go.
General, have you seen any anomalies in any other parts of the world today, or any missile launches or any activity whatsoever, even in a low threshold?
We haven't seen any problem areas associated with Y2K at this point. We have seen some missile launches. However, none of those are reportable. There have been no reportable incidents, missile problems. We have had, since the Y2K Center for Strategic Stability has opened, we have had 3 theater missile events. But each one of those was non-reportable according to the criteria that the United States government established with the Russian government.
Can you tell us a little bit more about these missile events? Who launched the missiles? Where did this occur, and when did it occur?
No, those details I cannot get into.
Can you tell us whether there was any missile activity either in Chechnya or in Iraq or North Korea?
Again, I cannot get into those details.
Did you have to report any of this to U.S. allies?
Those events are reported to U.S. allies. However, they are not reported with the agreement to our Russian guest here in accordance with the agreement that we had. Basically, no missile event is reported that is under 500 kilometers in distance. And each of those 3 were under 500 kilometers in flight distance, and thus were not reportable to the Russians at the Y2K Strategic Center under the agreements between our 2 countries.
Nonetheless, are the Russians aware of these 3 missile launches today?
I'm not sure that I can answer that they're aware of those missiles. I can't answer for them. We have not reported them to them under the criteria that we established.
And any impact in terms of the change of government in Moscow earlier today?
No change. No impact that I can see.
Let's just take this down for a second and try to explain to you, because we were caught as much off guard as you were. Let's just stay with this man for just a second. He reports there were 3 missile launches today, but he can't talk about them. Well, first of all, we know they were not threatening to the United States, or we would have been talking about them a long time before now. There is an early warning sharing arrangement with members of the NATO alliance, and also Israel, Japan, South Korea, and the Persian Gulf nations. But the Russians aren't supposed to know about it. Now, the Russians are here on this particular occasion with the North American Air Defense Command and with U.S. military, lest there be any instability. I'm very glad to say we have managed to get a hold of, in a big hurry here, our national security correspondent, John McWethy. John, you're in Washington. And what is this about missile launches, and he can't tell us anything about it?
The missile launches, Peter, have to do with the situation in Chechnya.
That's what I thought.
That is the problem. The rules of the game were that the United States said we will not report any of these Scud missile launches in that theater.
So how big a missile launch does it have to be before it's picked up by the people looking at the screens in Cheyenne Mountain?
It can be relatively small, and that is what they are seeing. The Scud missile is not a very long-range missile, and that just gives you some idea of how much detail the United States can actually see.
You've been monitoring this all day long. Is there any reason that you can think of that we should be going on with this briefing? Are there any surprises out there for anybody today?
There appear to be no surprises thus far, which I think that fact in itself has surprised the military. They expected some anomalies, as they call them, some mistakes of some kind, but they have seen virtually nothing so far around the world.
Okay, Jack, thanks very much. We'll let you listen to the rest of the news briefing from Cheyenne Mountain and then come back and tell us the rest of what the briefing officer said. John McCarthy, our national security correspondent, who is at the Pentagon. But he did catch us off guard there for just a moment and does, as Jack said, just reinforce for us how sensitive the surveillance is around the world. And earlier we got these reports from various parts of Russia saying they hadn't had any Y2K problems, at least in Russia, including with some of the systems that they had anticipated they might have troubles with, though quite frankly the Russian missiles were not included among them. We'll be back in a moment to take the measure of time again with Robert Krulwich. I hope you'll stay with us.
This is ABC 2000, the celebration of the millennium.
Just 2 hours before midnight in London and the new century there, we go to ABC's Charles Gibson, who is on the Thames. Charles.
Peter, these are the herald trumpets that were aligned along Tower Bridge, and this is the Queen, who is trying to light a laser, which is going to go across the river to light the national beacon on Tower Hill at the London Tower. And I was beginning to worry, this happened just a few seconds ago, and I was beginning to worry. You remember Bess Truman when she was whacking some ship trying to christen it with a bottle of champagne and the champagne wouldn't break? Mm-hmm. Well, the Queen couldn't get the laser lit very well either. It took a few moments. I'm not sure actually if the flame was going to light the laser or somebody had a little button that they were going to push to help the Queen out, but it did take forever here a few moments ago. It's going to happen here, I promise you. It did work finally. I thought the thing at this point was burning up, but indeed she got whatever needed to be lit. And then it seemed to go out. They're explaining to the Queen here what's supposed to happen. Even queens aren't fully apprised of these things. And then there's the laser that goes out, lights the national beacon. And this thing, which is about 30 feet long and about 30 feet high, finally did ignite. As we mentioned a little earlier, there are 300 of these beacons all around England that have been lit at various stages during the day. This by far the largest, and they will burn right up until midnight when they will be extinguished. This is all part of a fundraising effort that's going on throughout Great Britain. And these are live pictures now from the Tower of London, which of course is one of the great tourist attractions in England. We mentioned a little earlier the guards there are dressed like the beefeaters who are so familiar to Americans who happen to catch a glimpse of a gin bottle now and then. And it is, of course, the home of the British Crown Jewels, which is one of the most magnificent, if not the most magnificent, I guess, gathering of jewels in the world. And, of course, the Tower of London had a somewhat sordid past because it was a prison where many British nobility were at various times imprisoned, and various English scoundrels were held there as well.
Thanks, Charlie. We'll come back to you very shortly. It was wonderful to see that beacon there and be reminded of what Prime Minister Blair thinks of as the new sort of relationship between government and private industry, this great beacon of fire, and there on the edge, British gas. Now, not very far from where Charlie is of course, the Royal Observatory at Greenwich. We've talked a lot about time today. We've asked Robert Krulwich to come back and join us today. First, to answer a couple of questions. Yes. Sir, please. Sure. What's the most famous clock in the world among aficionados?
Among aficionados, we call it the H3.
H4?
H4, maybe H4.
H4, I think. We've all been doing trivia this time of year. Name for Harrison.
Name for a man who invented the clock that actually made it possible for a sailor somewhere out on the ocean to know where he was left to right, where he was not from the equator, but where he was in the open ocean east or west.
So if we're talking so much about science, why are you standing next to a fishbowl?
Because I got a better clock than that.
Okay.
I have a clock which was the answer to my question, which was, how did people know, since this day is so midnight focused all over the world, I began to think, before there were mechanical clocks, when all you had was a sundial, when the sun went down, who knew what time it was? So when did they think up midnight, and then how did they discover when it was?
You're going to tell us.
I have my example. This is my example of a Chinese water clock, a concept that was invented about 4,000 years ago. And as you see, it's a bowl of water, or a pot would do, with water, but with this difference. At the bottom, it leaks. So little drips are coming out. Somebody 4,000 years ago filled a bowl like this and took a bowl like this next to a sundial and watched the hour turn on the sundial and made a mark. This is how long it would take water to fall for 1 hour, and then another mark, 2 hours, and so on. Then he took the clock indoors to his house, and then he sat there after the sunset and knew from sunset how long 1 hour, he just wait and watch the water drop, how long 1 hour was, how long 2 hour was, and then at midnight, you know the song, Frère Jacques, dormez? Well, Frère Jacques' job was to sit in a monastery and watch waterfall in a bowl. And when it got to be midnight...
It's a truly monastic life.
Yes, and a dull job. He'd sonner le matin, and everybody would get up and pray. Unfortunately, as we all know, Frère Jacques was so bored by this that he fell asleep, the dormez-vous part. So this clock is a triumphant clock, and it can tell you when midnight was, but it required the Frère Jacques job, maybe the dullest job in the world. So, good clock, bad work.
How amazing. And where did it go from there? What's the...
Well, from there, it became an alarm clock. Somebody figured out how to turn a water wheel in here so it would ring an alarm, so it would sonner le matin all by itself, and then you could wake up to the bell. Cloche, actually, the word clock comes from bell ringing. These are all alarm clocks.
The most famous water clocks were in China, were they not?
They were, and they became more and more elaborate and more fancy. And there was a one-of-a-kind clock at some point, which was apparently a wonder of the world. The clockmaker died, and we never saw that clock again.
And the Chinese emperors, as they succeeded one another, didn't always leave in place what the previous emperor had designed.
Exactly. So the art of those clocks was lost. It suddenly popped up again in Arabia. It pops up again in Frère Jacquesville, I guess, in Western Europe. And it was pretty much the way people kept time for about 3,500 years.
So next time we look at our egg timers on the stove, if we're still looking at egg timers,
That's
and some
right.
of us are, this is where we get the original idea.
Right here.
Robert, thanks very much.
Welcome.
See you with the next one. Robert Krulwich taking a measure of time for us. On the subject of time, I did promise that I would entertain a visit from a representative of, I believe it's the M1. Sir, could you come in for a second, please, and explain to us what it is you have been so
actually
insistent?
the celebrity spokesman, Al Franken, for 2MI 2001, which is when the Millennium does begin. And,
oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, and we are, our goal really is to stop the nonsense. It's a little too late in some countries, but I'm glad, thank you for having me. As you know, ABC is where most Americans, more Americans get their news from ABC than any other source, and that's why I'm here. Also, CNN wouldn't let us let me on. But,
so what's the, what are you trying to convince me of?
Well, I think Stephen Jay Gould, when you talked to him earlier, said it best. The first year, set by Dionysius Ezechias, a monk in the 6th century, was the year 1 AD. They didn't have, in Roman numerals, they didn't have 0, so therefore the first year was 1 AD, and therefore the millennium ends when, on January 1st, 2001.
Are you a friend of Stephen Jay Gould's? Is that what this is
Well,
about?
we at 2MI think he's the lowest of the low, because he intellectually accepts what we're saying, but doesn't, when he was talking to you on the phone, he didn't press it, and I think that's worse than believing what everyone else believes.
Could you come here for a second, please? How do you, and you can convince me, I'll listen to your argument. Can you convince those people out there? Can you give me any reason why you should convince those people out there?
Well, first of all, I could show them this letter that I have signed by Stephen Hawking, 33 Nobel laureates, and Dick Cavett.
And what does the letter say?
It says that I'm right. I mean, that the year 2001 is the first, January 1st, is, and that you should be telling these people that.
I'll make you a deal.
Yes.
I'll make you a deal. If you can convince them, we'll buy your argument.
Okay. You want me? I'll...
Have a nice evening.
Okay.
If you can convince them...
Well, not all of them.
Well, if you can convince a majority of them, we'll buy your argument.
Okay, well, will you wear the T-shirt at least?
Oh, well, I'll certainly keep it around. When did anybody in the news business ever turn down a free T-shirt? Thank you
Well,
very
thank
much.
you,
If you
Peter.
can convince them, you can convince us. Too am I. Al Franken. We'll be back in just a moment.